So far you guys have been talking about themes and topics that have to do with knowledge. And I'm here today to switch things up a little bit. So I'm going to be talking about understanding, at least as it pertains to epistemology. Now, you might be wondering why we would even be talking about understanding in an epistemology course, right? And it wasn't that long ago that most epistemologists probably would have agreed with you. There was some literature going on in the philosophy of science, talking about understanding, but epistemologists viewed understanding to be more of a psychological state, or at least something that just wasn't worth analyzing from an epistemological point of view. But over the past decade or so, there's been just this huge surge in both the amount of literature and the number of philosophers that are thinking about understanding. And there's a couple of reasons for this, but what's cool is it's becoming a theme in epistemology in its own right. So, why understanding? Well, one of the motivations for the shift in focus has to do with just general problems that come along with trying to develop a theory of knowledge. So, as I'm sure you guys are aware, back in 1963, Edmund Gettier wrote this 2.5 long page paper that completely destroyed the tripartite account of knowledge. He showed that knowledge just isn't justified true belief. So since then, epistemologists have been trying to deal with these so-called Gettier cases, or really just epistemic luck in general, the kind of luck that defeats knowledge. So this brings some problems in with it, and trying to make sure you get the cases right, and make sure that this piece of knowledge or this belief is too lucky to count as knowledge, but this one isn't. So those are some problems there. There's also accounting for this idea that, it goes as far back as the Meno, right? That knowledge requires some sort of grounding, whatever you want to call it, like justification or liability or warrant or whatever. And so bringing that in to an account of knowledge brings with it its own set of problems. Now, I've got this third worry, too, that maybe accounts are getting too complex. This is based off of something that Timothy Williams said a while back. His idea was that if we end up with this theory of knowledge that's just, a bunch of clauses and subclauses and this really long thing, why should we care about that? I'll put a question mark here because I'm not sure that that's a very good worry. We care about it because it's an accurate theory of knowledge. That's a good thing to care about. That's the sort of thing we do care about as epistemologists. But maybe his point is more like, look, let's shoot for simplicity, Now, this isn't to say that understanding should take priority over knowledge or anything like that. And in fact, I think there's some really, really good, very promising accounts of knowledge out there that are really fun to look at and show a lot of promise. But these problems were originally discussed, well, at least really thoroughly discussed in this book here by Jonathan Quanvig, The Value of Knowledge and the Pursuit of Understanding. So in the first part of the book, what he does is he looks at all of these problems for lots of different theories of knowledge, and then ends up spending the rest of the time talking about understanding. Now, before this book came out in 2003, there were a couple of epistemology papers on understanding, and there were some pretty neat ones. But it's when this book comes out that really you start to see the surge in literature and more people talking about understanding. So this is one of the major catalysts of why understanding is becoming a theme in epistemology. Now, there's a second reason that we might want to think about understanding. And the thought here is that it seems like a suitable goal for at least a certain kind of inquiry. Now, the goal of inquiry is by itself its own topic, right? So you don't see this explicitly stated a whole lot in the literature, But there is this intuitive idea that there's some cases of inquiry where we prefer to understand than to know. So, compare inquiring about when the next train is coming to just learning about the world around you. Right? In the first case, all I really want is knowledge. I just want to know when the next train is coming. I mean, heck, I'd be satisfied with just a true belief about what time the next train is coming, so long as I get on the right train. But when we learn about the world around us, when we inquire in that way, it seems like what we're after is understanding, right? When you learn something, you'd rather understand the material than to just know a bunch of facts about it. I mean, last November saw the culmination of a nearly 11-year-long project to land a probe on a comet. That comet, right there. And so you've got to think that the scientific community that was engaged in this project, they're after understanding, right? They want to understand the origin and the nature and the composition of comets and their relation to life on Earth. So at least there's a certain kind of inquiry, what I'm calling pure inquiry, just inquiry for its own sake, right? Understanding may be a suitable goal here. So those are some reasons why epistemologists are talking about understanding. And what I thought I'd do, because even though the literature on understanding right now is still in its infancy, especially when compared to more traditional themes in epistemology, there's still a lot to talk about and a lot of really fun debates to be had, a lot of really good questions coming up in the literature, and it's far too much to cover in just one lecture. So what I thought I'd do is try to give you guys sort of a survey of the philosophical landscape that's going on. And I thought we might try to frame the lecture around this big picture question, just what is understanding? And see where that takes us. So first thing to notice, so just like knowledge, understanding has different uses or different kinds, right? Some of them we're interested in and some of them we're not. So if I say my partner is really angry with me and I say, look, I understand where you're coming from, right? That's sort of a hedging use of understanding. That's not really what we're talking about here. Or if I say, Bob has an understanding nature, right? That's not really, that just means he's maybe a compassionate person or a difficult person to get annoyed, something like that. So we want to get clear on the uses of understanding that are going to be the focus here of epistemology. So one kind is what's called explanatory understanding, so understanding why something is the case. We've also got propositional understanding. So this includes understanding that or what or when or where, all those kinds of things. The basic idea is that understanding, it takes a proposition as its grammatical object. So that's what's going on there. And there's also understanding some subject matter or a field of study. So, Sue understands astrophysics. And this is called objectual understanding. Because notice astrophysics isn't really a proposition, right? It's its own thing. It's not something that can be just straightforwardly true or false. Now, just to be clear, the standard approach here is that explanatory understanding is actually a kind of propositional understanding. So what we can do is rephrase this in a way that we take out the why and put in a that. So let's take this example. So Sue understands why some stars become black holes. We could rephrase that and say, Sue understands that some stars become black holes because their overall density surpasses the Chandrasekhar limit, or whatever. And so that's the standard line, is that this is a part of that. The reason why I have this on its own is because most of the literature that you're going to come across focuses on explanatory understanding. So it's a good term to know. But yeah, so let's see also what a satisfying theory of understanding should look like, right? If we're going to answer this question of what is understanding, Basically, we're going to give a theory of understanding, just like we want to give a theory of knowledge when we ask the question, well, what is knowledge? Now, you'll see a lot of similarities here insofar as what we're after for a satisfying theory. So, 3 goals to kind of keep in mind if you ever do get in the mood to develop an account of understanding. First and foremost, you want to get the cases right. Now, this turns out to be a bit trickier with understanding because there's more cases than there are with knowledge, right? With knowledge, you either know the P or you don't, and that's kind of the end of it. But if I say Sue understands astrophysics better than Sam, that makes sense, right? We have at least some intuitive idea of their epistemic state, at least in relation to astrophysics. I mean, if I had an astrophysics question, I would prefer to go ask Sue rather than Sam. So we want our account to be able to get the degrees of understanding, to be able to say, this person has a higher degree of understanding than this person. There's also cases of misunderstanding. And what I'm thinking about here is someone who thinks that they understand, but they actually don't. So an example is maybe a historian who's studying, some event like the French Revolution or something, and places too much significance on certain factors and ends up misunderstanding a particular event in history. And then somebody comes along and corrects that historian and says, oh no, look, it's supposed to be this way. So that first historian had some degree of misunderstanding on offer. And we also have a failure to understand. And this is probably something that we're all familiar with, just especially if you're struggling with a difficult piece of material or difficult concept and it's just not coming together. You just can't get it, right? You just fail to understand. So there's a variety of cases here that we want to get right. And it ends up being a little tricky. Now the second goal, we're going to spend some time on. So we want to be able to explain, account for the value of understanding. And we're not just that it's valuable, but that it's valuable for its own sake, what's called final value. Now, we'll talk more about final value in a little bit, but that's the kind of value we're going for, is to show that understanding has value for its own sake. It's finally valuable. And we also at least want to try to get our theory, and this is true for any sort of philosophical analysis, right? You want your analysis or your theory to match up with at least our broader intuitions about the topic. I mean, at the very least, if you give some account and it's wildly unintuitive, that's a mark against the theory. Unless you can give some sort of story as to why our intuitions about this subject were just so wrong in the first place. So with a question this big, and this is a big question, I mean, to the point of being overwhelming, honestly, it can be difficult to find a starting point. And philosophers, I mean, there's tons of methods that they employ to try and get the ball rolling. Here's just a few. So we could start with our intuitions and just think about the concept intuitively and see if we can get a more rigorous philosophical account based on those intuitions. That's a lot of what John Quanvig was up to in his book. He was relying on intuitions about the concept of understanding. We could also see how the concept is used in ordinary language and see if we can learn anything from that. So in ordinary language, we're able to say, Sue understands, Bill doesn't understand quite as much as Sue, Bob doesn't understand anything, right? We're able to apply this concept in ordinary language. So if we can look at how and why it's applied in particular cases, that might reveal something about the nature of understanding. Fortunately for us, we've got method 3. There's already literature on the topic. And remember, we're going to try and do a kind of a survey of this literature and see what people are saying. But this is obviously a really great method to employ, right? If you have some topic or some question that interests you, you start with the literature on it. You see, what are people talking about? You know, are there particular questions or themes that are coming up? And even if you disagree with everything that everybody's saying, that at least gives you a starting point to say, hey, these guys are wrong and this is what's right. So let's take a bit of look at the literature here. And so right now, we're focused on that second goal of accounting for the value of understanding. So here's some quotes. This first one's from Quanvig, understands a cognitive achievement, some sort of cognitive success term, Catherine Elgin. Understanding constitutes a cognitive achievement, Duncan Pritchard. And we can use these quotes and ultimately come up with something like this. So this is what I call the value of understanding thesis. And the claim here is that understanding has final value as a strong cognitive achievement. And you see this cognitive success term, cognitive achievement. So this claim is an important one. And in fact, I think it's a lot more important than it gets credit for. Because you'll often see, I mean, there's already a debate about whether or not this claim itself is true. But you'll often find in papers that aren't even talking about the value of understanding, where this claim is in the background somewhere. And definitely not explicitly, but that the author is thinking about this in some way. So a lot hangs on whether or not this claim is true. So let's try and unpack it a little bit. So there's two key concepts in play. First off, this idea of final value. And we talked a little bit about that, right? So something has final value if it's valuable for its own sake. Other words you might see used are non-instrumental. Some people use the word intrinsically valuable, although that's falling out of favor recently. But the idea here is that, yeah, that it's just valuable for its own sake. So money, right, is an example of something that has instrumental value. We don't value money for its own sake. We value it for the other things it can get us, right? So it's final value that we're after. And it has final value because it's a strong cognitive achievement. So the thought here is that these kinds of achievements, they have final value. Understanding is this kind of achievement, so it's also going to have final value as a strong achievement. So now the question is, what's a strong achievement? And here we can use our intuitions a little bit. Because most people, I guess all of us probably have an intuitive idea of what constitutes an achievement, right? We can list off certain things that are achievements. I mean, you know, so scoring a goal in the World Cup or hitting a really good golf shot, you know, those are achievements. And so relying on those intuitions, we come up with something like this. Now, this achievement thesis is something that Duncan Pritchard came up with just by looking at our intuitions about achievements. So this is a claim: achievements are successes that are because of ability. So that seems right. So the nice thing about this, right, you've got a goal, you've succeeded at it, and you did it because of your abilities, not because of dumb luck, not because someone or something intervened. So say an archer is trying to hit the bullseye of a target, and so she fires the arrow and it's way off course, but a lucky gust of wind comes and blows the arrow back on target, and she hits a bullseye. Intuitively, that's not an achievement, and this explains why. because her success isn't because of her ability. It's because of this lucky gust of wind. So it excludes cases of luck and things like that, which is a good thing. Achievement shouldn't be lucky. But there's a problem with the achievement thesis. So I'm going to demonstrate an achievement now. I'm going to walk over there. There, I did it. Ta-da, achievement, boom. I succeeded. I succeeded because of my abilities. But that's not the sort of thing that has final value. That's not the sort of thing that's valuable for its own sake. And maybe there was a quid on the ground that I walked over and picked up, right? Then it would have instrumental value. But just ordinary successes that are because of ability, we need something stronger. Because when we think about achievements that have value for their own sake, that have final value, they're difficult. They're hard to do. And so that leads to this idea of a strong achievement. So this is also Duncan Pritchard. And notice we still have the achievement thesis, so achievements are successes that are because of ability, so that's good. But we just have this additional part here. So the success is going to involve overcoming a significant obstacle, or it's going to have a significant level of ability in play. Now, of course, there's lots of questions as far as like what constitutes a significant obstacle or something like that. We don't really need to worry about that at this point. The basic idea behind this is that we want achievements to be hard to do. Those are the kinds of achievements that have final value. And if it turns out that, say, a particular person, they succeed in something, but it wasn't all that difficult for them, it's going to be precisely because they have a high level of ability. So take a Major League Baseball pitcher, right? These guys can throw a baseball 90 miles an hour, like no problem. They do this 100 times in a game. I don't think with years of training and coaching that I could even break 80. But it's precisely because of their significant level of ability that this task isn't all that difficult for them. So that's what's going on in the strong achievement thesis. And that's what's going on in the value of understanding thesis, right? So it's got final value as a strong cognitive achievement. So the cognitive part just means it happens up here. And that's fine. We can have achievements that happen up here. Seeing a really good chess move, that's a cognitive achievement. Solving a really difficult maths problem, right? So that's what that's trying to capture. But there are some objections to this value of understanding thesis that it'd be good to take a look at. So this first one, this easy understanding objection, this comes from a guy, Daniel Whiting. And what he says, I mean, the idea here is that there are cases of understanding that are just too easy to count as strong achievements. They might be achievements, but they're not strong achievements. And if that's right, then the value of understanding thesis doesn't work. We can't say that understanding has final value. We'll have to qualify it. We'll have to say some kinds of understanding have final value as strong achievements. So he objects by using a case. So the case he uses, I think he calls it milk. And the basic idea is a dad walks into the kitchen, his son is at the table, and his son accidentally knocks over the glass of milk and it spills on the table. So Whiting says, okay, well the dad now understands why there's milk spilled on the table, right? Because his son just knocked over the glass. But in a case like this, he didn't even have to put two and two together, right? He just saw what happened and got there. There doesn't seem to be any sort of strong achievement on offer. Now, how are we going to respond to something like this? I mean, we could stick to our guns. We could insist that, yes, this is a strong achievement, you know? But that Remember, we want our account to match up with our broader intuitions, and it just doesn't seem like a very intuitive line to take. Now, there's another aspect of the literature that, as far as I know, everybody agrees on, is that understanding involves a network of information, a large body of beliefs. So you might think in a case like this with the spilt milk that maybe there's just not enough information going on for the dad to really count as having understanding. He's just not even in the market for understanding. He knows why the milk is spilled. But whether or not he understands, that's a silly question to ask in a case like this. You might argue that if the intuition here is that understanding is something over and above knowledge, then there should be a case in which the dad knows why the milk is spilled, but fails to understand why the milk is spilled. And that seems weird, right? So the idea, the response to this is maybe to say that, well, maybe what's going on here, you know, you can grammatically use the word understanding in this sentence, but it's not carrying any epistemological weight with it, right? You might as well just say knows. Whether or not that line works, though, too early to say. It's something to think about. Now, here's another objection, and this one is, from Kevin Morris. And what he says is not only is understanding not a strong achievement, it's not even an achievement at all. And the reason has to do with this, with intervening luck. So remember our archer who hit the target because of a lucky gust of wind? In that case, our intuition was that she didn't demonstrate a genuine achievement, right? Because her success wasn't because of her abilities, it was because of this lucky gust of wind. And that's this kind of intervening luck. And so what Morris says is that understanding is compatible with this kind of luck, but achievements aren't. So not only is it not a strong achievement, it's not even an achievement to begin with, because you're going to have a case of understanding where your success isn't due to your abilities. So one of the cases he uses is this fake fire officer case. So imagine you come home and you find that your house is burned down. And on the scene is this guy dressed as a fire officer. And so you go up and you ask him, hey, what happened? And he says, oh gosh, I'm really sorry, but you know, there was some faulty wiring in the kitchen and started a fire, it spread, it's just a mess. Now, as it turns out, this guy is just some sort of lunatic that likes to dress up as fire officers and go to the houses of people who are arriving home to find their houses burned down and just lie to them about the cause of the fire. So he's just making up some cause of the fire, saying that it was faulty wiring in the kitchen. But as it turns out, he's right. Everything he says was just spot on. And we can even build this case up to say, like, he would say the exact same thing that a genuine fire officer would have said on the scene. So the thought behind this objection is that your success now, which is supposed to be, I guess, a true explanatory belief about the cause of the fire, right? You've got this true belief, but you didn't get that because of your abilities. The only reason you have this true explanatory belief is because of just dumb luck. But Morris argues that you still understand why your house burned down in this case. So if he's right, that's a big, big problem for the value of understanding thesis. Now, we don't really have time to go into responses to this one because they get a little bit involved, and there's one last topic that I want to mention to you guys because it's a big one. And it's the question of whether understanding is a species of knowledge. Now, the people who think that it is usually take either one or both of these lines. They might say that understanding is just a more robust, a thicker kind of knowledge that just requires more from the agent, cognitively or something like that. That, you know, it's nice, it's fun, but it's still just knowledge. Or they might take a different line and say that, well, when you come to understand, it's just because you know more things. So it's almost like this spectrum, right? Of, you know, a little bit, you know more, and then you cross some threshold and you come to understand, but it's still on the spectrum of knowledge. Stephen Grimm is one of these proponents. So he thinks that explanatory understanding, so understanding why something is the case, is just what he calls knowledge of causes. So, yeah. Now, we won't have time really to get into whether this is right. The debate's a fun one to be had. The important thing to take away here, though, is that even if these guys are right, our big picture question of what is understanding is still an important one to answer. And in fact, these guys are still answering this question, even if it is a little indirectly, right? So say you argue that understanding is a more robust kind of knowledge. Okay, well, what makes it more robust? What else is needed from the agent? And in answering those questions, you're basically answering what is understanding. It just so happens that it's a species of knowledge. But they're still focused on this question. Same goes for the second line. If you want to say that understanding is knowledge of causes, then you better give a story about what knowledge of causes amounts to and why it's important. And Stephen Grimm spends a lot of time developing this idea, and in so doing, answering this question of what is understanding. Now, there's so many other fun things in this field of epistemology, and more keep coming out. You know, the literature just, I don't see it slowing down anytime soon, because there's so many fun avenues and angles and things to think about. But hopefully you guys have at least a broad idea of the kinds of things people are talking about, the big questions that are out there. Of course, that's all we really have time for today. So if you guys do have any questions, please do feel free to email me. There's my email address. I'm usually really quick about getting back to you. If you prefer to meet in person, that's fine too. Since I'm an undergraduate or postgraduate, I don't keep office hours, like strict office hours or anything like that. But if you send me an email, we'll figure out a time to meet. That's fine. And if there's any part of this that, you know, has piqued your interest, that you want to learn more about, let me know. I've got tons of papers I can email you that deal with all sorts of different questions. So thank you guys so much.